everyone, this is Dave. Thank you so much for watching as always, and welcome back to another video. Congratulations to all the RocketLab investors out there on their recent returns in the stock. Over the past few weeks, RocketLab has made a lot of progress on their upcoming Neutron rocket, so we are well past due on a video summing up all the Neutron progress for you. And that's what we'll do today. If you're new here and you do enjoy this video and find it informative, I hope you will consider subscribing by the end of the video. And if you're not new here, well, thanks for continuing to watch. As always, I'll check out your comments down below, and those likes always do help out with the YouTube algorithm and are much appreciated. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into Rocket Lab's Neutron updates. As Peter Beck says during Rocket Lab's earnings calls, there's really three areas we should focus on when watching for Rocket Lab's Neutron progress. First of all, of course, is the propulsion with Rocket Lab's Archimedes engine. That's always one of the longest poles in the tent, and we need to see progress on the propulsion front. Second of all, we need to start seeing rocket structures, including tanks, pressure tests, things of that nature, and we've got some good news on that front as well. And then third of all, not the rocket itself, but you need to have launch pads and launch infrastructure. So Rocket Lab's been busy constructing that on the ground at Wallops, and there's been some good progress on that front as well. All three of those categories are the ones we're going to be covering today. First of all, let's dive into the structures category. On November 28th, Rocket Lab shared a new video to their Twitter account showing their wet dress rehearsal campaign for the Stage 2 tanks. This initial wet dress rehearsal successfully ran flight avionics and pressurant and propellant management systems to emulate flight operations. We had some amazing views in this video, from drone shots overhead to the New Zealand countryside, and Teddy also chiming in the background of this video. Thank you so much, Teddy. Now, this is the second video we've gotten of a Stage 2 tank test campaign, even though there has not yet been a Stage 1 test campaign, but not to worry, Stage 2 needs to have a much greater focus on weight and efficiency in being as thin as possible versus Stage 1, so if they do get this test campaign down properly, then Stage 1 should be no problem. Now, there do appear to be some changes from this new second version compared to the initial tank test we did see. Let's take a closer look at them side by side. Well, first of all, on the right-hand side with the newer tank, we do have a couple small COPV tanks along the bottom. These are probably holding T-tab ignition fluids, I would imagine, which helps with the ignition process. Second of all, it does look to me like that newer stage on the right has been to the gym a little bit. It's looking more slim and trim, or perhaps stretched and taller than the one on the left, the initial tank. Let me know if you agree with me on that, or you think it's just camera angles playing tricks on my eyes. According to friend of the channel, Captain D2, who is quite a smart guy, he recently posted a Twitter thread on the subject, and he calculated, based on pixel counting and things like that, that the second stage tank, the new version, has been stretched about 14% taller compared to the previous version. This could be a couple different things. First of all, it could just be that the first version, which was, by the way, tested to destruction, which the second version wasn't, was always just planned to be a little bit smaller just for testing purposes. Or it could be that they have decided they need the second stage to actually be a bit larger to have higher performance. This could be due to maybe the first stage being heavier and them therefore needing a performance boost on that second stage, or perhaps they've just decided they want some additional performance beyond what they originally expected. The downside of having a taller tank, of course, means that there would be less space for the satellites inside those fairings, so that's a trade-off that they would be making if indeed that second tank has been stretched, unless of course the entire rocket itself has been stretched as well. Let me know what you think about these different possibilities down below, or if you think we're just reading too much into things. Also, we don't know for sure whether this new tank that they've been testing in their wet dress rehearsal is flight hardware or another test model. It could very well be that we see a third tank built for the first flight. Keep in mind that this is in New Zealand, so they'll have to ship them across the world to Wallops for that first launch. But what I can say is that the tank certainly looks a lot more mature and a lot more close to flight ready than that first one did. Although both look pretty cool if you ask me. Next up, Neutron's Hungry Hippo fairings. Back on November 18th, RocketLab tweeted out an image of their updated Neutron fairing with a Sir Peter Beck for scale. We have talked about this one previously. Comparing it to their initial announcement video, we can see it's a lot shorter and made of less pieces, seems a little bit simpler. We also heard from a recent Haste launch that RocketLab was actually testing out some of the hardware involved in the opening and the closing of the Hungry Hippo fairing to make sure it would work properly on a Neutron. If you remember back to my previous video where we saw these triangular shaped pieces, now with a full Neutron fairing image, it's easy to see how they get assembled together into a completed fairing. For reference, if you're not too familiar, here is where these fairings will go at the top of the rocket, protecting satellites from Earth's atmosphere as they ascend up to space. These fairings will, of course, open and close, staying attached with Neutron as opposed to most rockets, which jettison their fairings once they reach space. This gives Neutron an advantage, bringing those fairings back home and allowing for easier reuse versus a Falcon 9, which has to fish them out of the ocean, which have to completely build new fairings after every flight. Next up, if you remember from our last video, we featured these Neutron fixed fairing panels that will attach the fairings to the body of the rocket. This one being manufactured in RocketLab's Maryland facility in the United States, I do believe. Well, we now have updated pictures showing these panels attached to the fairings. You can see how these panels do attach to that fairing and then the overall rocket down below, with a technician doing measurements giving us a sense of scale. Quite a big rocket, that's for sure, when you compare to Electron. And of course, this once again is where this piece will be on the overall rocket body. Now, if you were wondering about that first stage and where they are in the structures for testing the first stage tanks, we did get an update on that in RocketLab's most recent earnings call. They showed off some flight hardware for the stage 1 propellant tank, which is undergoing manufacture now, as well as the molding. Next up for these stage 1 propellant tanks will be qualification in full flight configuration, similar to how we saw that recent second stage test go. If you look at this model of the Neutron, you can see there's two separate areas for propellant versus oxidizer, as rockets do have to carry for propellant versus oxidizer, which does combine into the engines down below. So hopefully it won't be too long before we get to see a similar video showing that stage 1 tank being pressure tested and having a wet dress rehearsal. So wrapping up the structures, if you combine all these different pieces we've seen, looking at the overall structure of the rocket, we've actually seen a lot of it already not assembled together, but getting ready to go. I think remaining, we just have some side panels that should be relatively easy to manufacture. We haven't really seen any concrete images for the canards, although I think we did see a test canard at one point, and perhaps on the fringe of a RocketLab picture out of focus, we saw some potential canards here that will be used for steering Neutron through the atmosphere. So we want to see some flight hardware for those, as well as some more panels, and we're getting very close to a full Neutron when it comes to the structure of the vehicle. Pretty exciting time for RocketLab and Neutron's development. Okay, next up, let's go to propulsion. Obviously, RocketLab's made a lot of progress on their Archimedes engine, and we've seen several great videos of Archimedes hot firing at NASA's Stennis Space Center recently, but on December 3rd, we got even more new images of Archimedes firing, and things are starting to look even better. RocketLab has doubled their engine test cadence over the past few months, rapidly implementing tweaks to Archimedes on the test stand at Stennis in Mississippi. If you go back to some of the initial Archimedes pictures, you can see that while you expect more of a blue flame for a methane-based engine, we weren't really getting too many blues, and in fact, we were getting some greens in these initial pictures. Now, we got an explanation that the green was coming from TTEB, which is an ignition fluid we saw previously that is probably going to be in those COPV tanks on that second stage. But also some of that green may have been coming from engine-rich exhaust, aka little bits of the engine getting burned up and going into the exhaust, turning it green, which is obviously not ideal to burn away your engine bell. These newer pictures, we are seeing some of those amazing blue flames that look so awesome, and I've always loved that blue color. As well, the edges of the exhaust look much more clean. We're getting those chevrons in the middle you love to see, and it's looking like much more of a final product, at least to me. Again, I am not a rocket propulsion expert, just a fan watching from afar. Recently, Peter Beck also did an interview with yours truly. Vince is bullish, friend of the channel, also asked a question on the Archimedes test campaign, and Peter gave us a very in-depth explanation on the continuing Archimedes test campaign, what we can expect, and how this is not just a one-and-done test. Let's take a quick listen to that now for some more in-depth information.
An engine is just like this living, breathing, fluid thing. You're continually tweaking on it. I mean, but for Archimedes as it sits today, it's in an engine qualification program. So what that means is we're looking to explore, it's called Runbox, and we're looking to explore, all of the idiosyncrasies of that engine, all of the operating conditions that it might see, plus margin. So, for example, when we do a landing burn, the tank pressures are slightly lower than when we do ascending. So we have to condition the propellant because the propellant's slightly warmer than when we took off from the ground because it's had chance to mix with the ullage and warm up. So you have to bound all of these different operating conditions and then test the engine at all these different operating conditions and then add margin to them as well. And then, you also go through a bit of a process of just finding limits. That's why, nobody should be shocked or too worried if we blow an engine up. I mean, just to be clear, we haven't. But if we blow an engine up, well, that's also normal because, you want to find and prove the margin that you have. If you think you have, 1.2 times safety factor on pump rotational speed, then you want to take it up to 1.2, obviously, but, is it 1.21? Is it 1.25? So some tests you deliberately, might run it up to 1.4 and something might let go because you want to actually, sample those margins and actually, determine where they truly are versus where you predict them to be. So, an engine qualification program is a very long program. The first engines that go on the vehicle will be qualified for flight, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of the development program. We'll continue to refine and iterate and improve the engine over the coming years.
So looks like overall Archimedes is progressing well. I don't believe we've seen a vacuum optimized version of it yet for the second stage, which would be firing in space where there's no atmosphere, but that should be coming shortly. All in all, I would say propulsion for Neutron is looking pretty good. We've had more and more engines being delivered, being pictured, and production is spooling up rapidly. Next up, on to the Wallops launch complex, where we've seen a flurry of activity and progress being made to the all-important launch infrastructure, which will be supplying the rocket with fuels and supporting the launch cadence. One of the most visible signs of progress being made by RocketLab. Previously, we did already see the water deluge tower going in with that cool looking RocketLab logo on it, but we've got a lot more now. Let's take a look. In terms of the launch mount for Neutron to sit on, first of all, on November 14th, RocketLab shared pictures of their heavy steel 165-ton Neutron launch mount for Launch Complex 3. This structure at the time was completing fabrication and getting ready for installation at the launch pad, with, once again, a Neutron engineer for scale. Not long after that, On November 27th, RocketLab tweeted the launch mount is taking shape fast at LC-3 in Wallops, Virginia, and we can see the steel feet and structures that will be supporting this launch mount going in place. On that same day, November 27th, Peter Beck tweeted a picture of that full platform now being installed, sitting on those legs, as well as piping underneath to supply Rocket Lab's first and second stage with the propellant and oxidizer it needs to fly. During my interview with Peter, he pointed out a unique design feature about the launch complex and Neutron itself and how it fuels up with the second stage. Let's take a listen to that now. And I guess I had one other Neutron question here. So I think quite a while back, you talked about once a Neutron is assembled, it's going to stay upright. Is that kind of still the plan, or will you need transporter erector to move things around?
No, I mean that's absolutely the plan from day one. Is I hate lifting ops, and especially those tilting ops with a big vehicle. They're a pain, and it just requires a lot of infrastructure, as you point out. I mean, the pad has no strong back, and it has no strong back because we want to land this thing vertically and should never need to break over. So. That's definitely the plan. We'll see how that works out in practice and operations. It's no biggie to break it over if we have to, but it's just extra infrastructure and extra time and extra cost that we don't want to have to put in. We have no strong back, so all of the internal piping to fill stage 2 is actually inside, runs up the side, inside of the vehicle. That's just to remove a whole bunch of complexity, of course, but also to make it rapidly reusable. You literally just plug in a second stage and it just couples up with the quick connects and away you go.
Just the other day, on December 15th, RocketLab tweeted some more pictures of the test stand, those pipes looking like they're getting close to being connected, as well as the overall complex under construction. I have to say, the shot from underneath that stand, to me, looks absolutely amazing. The launch mount sitting at 160 tons, and that's not even imagining a fully fueled Neutron sitting on top of that. Now that is a heavy load to carry. Friend of the channel, Captain D2, who is definitely worth a follow as well on Twitter, has been working on some amazing renders for us of Rocket Lab's launch infrastructure as well as Neutron, and we can see progress going in here with tanks on the right and left, as well as a connection to the water deluge system below the materializing launch pad for Neutron. Note underneath it, there will be some kind of a diverter or deflector there for the pipes. They won't just take the full brunt of the Archimedes flames, but we're not too sure what that is going to look like quite yet. We also have an image here from another friend of the channel, Starship S24, who is great for the community and goes out and checks out the launch infrastructure and takes pictures for us regularly, with an image of how he expects the stage 2 test stand to look as it shapes up at Wallops, because they don't want to be testing those stage 2s in New Zealand forever. We can see where it's going to take place and the foundations already getting ready to go, where the pipes will go as well, connecting that stage 2 test stand. Now let's take a quick look side by side at this zoomed out picture of the launch complex at Wallops that we received just recently versus the last one we saw previously, and we can check out all the progress being done. Obviously the launch stand, we've got new tanks going in, got new foundations coming in as well for yet another tank farm here on the left, presumably for that second stage test stand. Things certainly seem to be coming together nicely for the launch complex. Now, another thing you do need to launch a rocket is the required approvals from the FAA and the government, and luckily we're seeing the first signs of the FAA starting to streamline that licensing process right now. In a recent article from Jeff Faust with Space News, we're hearing that the FAA is taking steps to streamline licensing for launch operators as the agency continues to face pressure to accelerate that process. They announced on December 13th that they will accept flight safety analysis performed by launch ranges in California, Florida, and most importantly for us, Virginia, in applications for launch licenses under regulations known as Part 450. This means that companies will no longer have to perform similar analysis specifically for the FAA as part of the licensing process. reducing duplication of work for these companies. So another good sign for reduction in red tape and progress on the licensing front for RocketLab. So those are the Neutron updates I have for you today. We have structures, propulsion, and launch infrastructure all making good progress towards a hopeful first launch in mid-2025. Let me know down below how you're feeling about that launch schedule, whether you think RocketLab can hit it or will see even more delays. Always interested to continue the discussion down below. Personally, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this timeline, and I think the progress we're seeing, tangible progress, really speaks for itself. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please do consider hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're already a subscriber, as I said, those likes and comments always help out as well. I hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of the week. I will see you soon for my next video. Bye for now.